Hi, welcome to the Mayor's Table. I'm Farmington Mayor Nate Duckett, and with me for the first time this year, City Manager Rob Mays. Rob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's great to be on the Mayor's Table with a fresh face and looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, well, we're here in our office for this episode. We haven't done one yet here at City Hall, so we've been on location throughout the city, providing great information to our community, and I think today's episode is going to be very valuable as well. Today we're going to talk about strategic planning. When we talk about strategic planning, obviously we're talking about budgeting for the future and looking at what our priorities are for where we want the city to go. I've shared my vision quite a bit out there in regards to outdoor recreation and the opportunities that exist here and the way the city can get involved in those. But we also have to look at how do we pay for some of the things that we're talking about. More importantly to me, I think, how do we pay for the services that we already have and expect?
Yeah. Well, when we're talking about strategic planning, we're talking about coming out of this budget process this year. I proposed to the council that we needed to take a step back and really from almost an at-scratch perspective take a look at everything we're doing. Because the fact of the matter is this is really specifically strategic financial planning about a sustainable future and how we pay for the things we're doing. We have been through now nearly 10 years of challenging financial times. And a lot of things are starting to catch up with us. And while we are healthy as an organization, but just under the water level, there are some things that are emerging and catching up with us that we need to address head on as an organization because we need to be healthy going into the future, particularly with some of the unknowns that are ahead of us.
I think that's really a valid point. For the last 10 years, we dealt with a big drop in 2009. They cost us about 17.5%, 18% in gross receipts tax, and we've managed for the last 10 years, and under your leadership here at the city and city council, we've managed to maintain services during that time. We haven't had to cut anything.
Right.
How have we managed the last 10 years in that regard? Because I think that moves into this component that you talked about. I shouldn't say how have we. We reduced the size of government.
We did.
Inside government, we diverted costs for things, pushed them on down the road. And some of those things are now coming to the point where we go, we can't push them anymore.
Yeah, that's really the key, I think, to this point here is that there's a culmination of things that have caught up with us. Let me list some of the things. So we talk a lot about 2009 because it was the high mark of our gross receipts, taxes, and revenues to the city. And ever since then, as you mentioned, today as we sit here, our tax rate is 14% below what it was in 2009. And that's critical.
That's with inflation, correct?
No, that's the actual amount.
14%.
That is the tax. That is the tax base.
Gotcha.
Yes, and so there are other things that have caught up that exasperate that, like inflation. And I'll mention that in a minute. But the reason that's significant, you've got to go back to our service level. The era of the 20 years prior to 2009 established an understanding and a expectation of the levels of service of our partnerships with other governmental entities, subsidies that the city of Farmington provides from its general fund to other entities, both public and private. So over the previous 20 years, we saw a spike of almost double-digit growth year after year after year, and that created this expectation. The fact is, though, we live in a different world now. So let's talk about, you mentioned the tax base itself, down 14%. Inflation during that same period up 17.3%. So our buying power is down, our tax base is down. In addition to that, the state legislature, and we've talked about this many times in this program with the prior mayor and in many public meetings, our state legislature through the hold harmless, they're reneging on their promise to this state, the citizens of the state. We are losing another 11.4% of our revenue. That's just taking a cut right out of the chunk of our GRT, and so another area of loss. One that's not easy to quantify is losses of GRT leakage to internet sales. Right. Not only do we lose local jobs to internet sales, we lose tax rate as well. And you mentioned this earlier. One of the things that we've done is we have deferred a lot of areas of capital maintenance and investment. There are things that are starting to catch up with us, and some of it isn't just deferral, some of it's just the age. Take our ball fields, a topic that's near and dear to your heart. These ball fields of things are getting old. Infrastructure is getting old. Things are wearing out. Buildings are old. Roofs are getting older. So we have to address those things. So at the end of the day, what this strategic financial planning is about is really taking an honest look at an important gap. There's a gap between right now the recurring revenues that we have and reasonably can project for the future, and actually the amount of money that we need to maintain the service levels that we have now.
Right.
And the facilities and the various operations and programs that we have. We need to address that, and that gap has to be filled one way or another. We haven't paved as many streets as we ought to pave. We haven't bought as many police cars as we ought to buy. I mentioned roof maintenance, and on it goes. And so we need to address those things and decide how we're going to meet that gap, because we can't go on sustainably without addressing that gap. So I mentioned earlier we're going to take kind of a from the scratch. So we're going to go into this strategic planning, which is going to be in the end of July, August timeframe. Look at every single one of our revenue sources, every single one of our services, our programs, our facilities, our subsidies to other governmental entities, to other private social services entities. Frankly, every cost driver that we have, we will dissect, evaluate, assess fresh with priorities, matching it against what our available revenues are, and have to determine a way to solve that gap.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, it's going to boil down to either reducing services or expenditures by curtailing services to some level, or subsidies to some level or another, or a revenue enhancement opportunities that may be there, or most likely some combination of both. But the key is we have to put ourselves in a strong, sustainable place where our recurring revenues on a reasonable projection for the future match up to the expenses that we really do need to maintain the expectations that we've created. And those expectations, as I said, were created in a pre-2009 world when GRT was doing this, when in fact GRT is doing this now. So that's really in a nutshell what this is all about.
So it's a holistic approach that council's really gonna have to sit back and look at. I like the way you framed it. Certainly for me as the mayor of Farmington, this strategic planning is not just about next year. It's not just about 3 years from now. We're looking at 5 to 10 years.
That's right.
And with the uncertainty that exists here 4 years from now with San Juan Generating Station, with the coal mine operations out there, the number of jobs that are on the table really that we could potentially lose, not to mention the income and tax dollars that are a part of that. We have an opportunity now where, and I've said this before, where we really have to be smart and we have to strike now. We have to plan this out now.
Yeah.
Because 4 years from now, if we sit down and say, you know what, we're having a strategic plan now that we've lost all these jobs, well, we're already in the hole.
That's
so
right.
how do we deal with that?
Well, I really appreciate you making that point, because this is a proactive action we're taking, not a reactive one. Obviously, to some degree, we are managing the realities of the last 10 years, but we've been managing those all along. This really is a forward-looking plan to say, if we know a certain roof is only going to last X amount longer, or the fleet is going to hit a point where police cars aren't, or other things, we have to address those things. We can't wait until they're a crisis. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future, and we need to be ready for that to make sure that this community is ready to more than survive those challenges of the future, but to continue to thrive as a viable community, a place where people want to live and move here. And certainly, you mentioned earlier the discussions about the outdoor recreation is just one of our focuses of economic development and diversification. That's a huge focus of ours for the future, but we've got to sit back now and take a look at the things we're doing and be sure that we've looked at them fresh and decided, are these still the priorities today? And if so, what financial plan needs to be in place to maintain those services in the future?
I think that's really it in a nutshell, Rob. I appreciate you taking the time to explain this, and I would certainly ask the viewers in our community, to stay informed, stay in touch with your council. They are your elected officials. They're here to represent you. There will be a lot of information that will be coming out, and we'll ensure that it's out there available for the public as we go through this process. But we appreciate your input as we plan a future for our community. Yeah,
I think the one thought I might want to leave folks with, I don't think we're wanting to create a dynamic or a sense where groups out there or special interests that a certain service is very important to them, that it's likely to be cut. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think we are committed, and I know you're committed, that we want to do the services that we're doing, and we want to maintain those, but we have a responsibility to take a strategic look at the things we're doing and be sure that we're doing the most important things and have our resources allocated where they need to be.
I think operating an efficient government is exactly what the community wants, making sure that those services, we're getting the biggest bang for the buck out of that public dollar that we're utilizing. This is exactly what governments have to do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they become overinflated, they become unfocused, and I think we can't afford to be that right now when we see what may be coming up here in 4 years. So
yeah.
It's a good opportunity. Well, thank you for joining us here on the Mayor's Table. We appreciate the information that you bring to us as well, which quite a bit of that here. But stay tuned as we go through this process. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time here on the Mayor's Table.